Hi, I'm Loris Alexander. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the top stories we've been following. The Lethbridge Soup Kitchen hosts a brunch, and this time with extras. Your mission from Southern Alberta Crime Stoppers, should you choose to accept it. And small businesses in our city urge residents to choose to shop local this Christmas season.
Your nation. Your province. Your Southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
This morning, the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen served up more than just a meal. Snow Ridge Stables came by with special visitors for guests to mingle with while they enjoyed a stack of pancakes delivered by our local IHOP restaurant.
We really appreciate, first of all, the postal workers group that is here with the Lethbridge and District Labour Council, who are doing it once or twice a month, which is great. And the whole thing about doing breakfast on a Sunday or brunch is something we've worked at for a while. We're still needing one more group to do that, but it's really good. And to add the extra of having a group out here, Maureen and her stable, I guess we'll call it, who's bringing some live animals, just something different. We don't generally see that. And so for me, anytime we can enhance the lives of people in whatever way that is, that's something we want to do, and so this serves that purpose very, very well.
I think the way the world is right now, with everything kind of being in a crazy energy, the collective is made up of the individuals, and as individuals, we can all make a difference, which changes the collective. And so if we can all do our part and try to see the humanness and the kindness and the difference we could make in someone's life, then it expands and grows and gets bigger. It's like something lights up inside of them that they haven't reached for a long time. And a lot of times there's tears, there's happy tears, you can't describe really what it does for them. So I don't care really what it takes on my behalf to make that happen for people. I will do it. I'm just kind of excited to watch people come in and not even know this is going on and just light up a little bit and maybe walk away thinking, my day was pretty good today.
A thief is on the loose, and it's up to you to catch them. Southern Alberta Crime Stoppers want you to find out who done it in their latest scavenger hunt.
Unfortunately, this year we had to cancel our annual fun run. So in place of that, we really wanted to find an event that would get people out and about, exploring the city in a fun and safe way. So with that, we created and have now launched our crime-stopping scavenger hunt. As a nonprofit, we do not get any government funding, so we're solely reliant on generous sponsors, donations, as well as revenue generated from events such as the scavenger hunt. So the sign-up fee for the scavenger hunt is $15 for an individual and $30 for a team entry or a family. With that, you get a complimentary Crime Stoppers face mask. And should you finish the event, you get entered into the grand prize draw of $500.
Small businesses in Lethbridge are urging people to shop locally. We explain why it's important to support local business owners while also trying to slow the spread of COVID-19. It's a chance for Lethbridge to get into the Christmas spirit and a chance for small business owners to bounce back from sliding sales during the pandemic.
It really means a lot to me when customers are buying from my business because it makes our business open and it's not going to shut down our business.
Government-mandated restrictions due to the pandemic have made it necessary for local retailers to adjust their operations.
As everybody knows, we're kind of struggling with COVID and the restrictions that are put on us. So supporting local, you're keeping somebody's dreams, hopes alive. You're keeping the smaller businesses going. We've already seen a bunch of small ones shut down.
It's tempting to go for one-click options, but ultimately it's the local shops that will be paying the price.
Well, times have been tough. Since March we were shut down for 4 months, finally reopened with very little traffic. We've been contending with construction, lack of parking down here, but man, we've got the deals down here and we'll beat the heck out of Amazon because here you can actually see the stuff before you buy it. It's important to keep the money in the locale for Lethbridge especially. So
U.S. District Court Judge Matthew Brand dismissed a lawsuit on Saturday filed by U.S. President Donald Trump's campaign seeking to throw out millions of votes in Pennsylvania. Judge Brand said the campaign had failed to provide evidence of widespread voter fraud in the state, but had instead presented the court with strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations. Referring to a claim regarding the violation of equal protection, Judge Brand said this claim, like Frankenstein's monster, has been haphazardly stitched together. The Trump campaign released a statement thanking Brand for his quick decision and said they will be seeking an expedited appeal to the Third Circuit. For the past 50 years, Mission Aviation Services has allowed Samaritan's Purse to rapidly provide relief supplies and deploy emergency personnel anywhere in the world. They say there is one name that is the driving force behind their mission.
Samaritan's Purse Mission Aviation Services exist in order to get supplies and people to different locations at a rapid pace. We can't do that just by boat or by vehicle. These international locations we have to get to fast.
We have many aircraft that we use to accomplish this. We have DC-3, we have a DC-8, and then a Bell 206 helicopter. We also have other airplanes.
We have airplanes all around the world. We have some stationed in Alaska, in Africa, here in Greensboro, in North Wilkesboro.
Whenever a disaster hits anywhere in the world, we're stocked with supplies and ready to respond at a moment's notice to any crisis, any place. The DC-8 is the largest plane we have in our fleet. You can look at the Caribbean, 3 back-to-back hurricanes that rolled through there. We were running kind of a hub and spoke system out of San Juan and St. Martin and Antigua. So we had a caravan, a helicopter, our turbine DC-3 down there, and we could make all those airplanes help service the DC-8. So we could land in the morning with freight, they could load it onto those other airplanes, reach smaller locations, and then with the helicopter, we're able to get to places that roads weren't even accessible. We'd sling load the freight into the backyard of houses and be able to service any place on the island. In East Africa, the area is huge, and you're going through a lot of expanse with not good infrastructure on the ground, so being able to get there by plane allows you to get in and out of the same location in a day versus taking several days to get to where you want to go.
When we hear on the news that there's been a disaster somewhere in the world, especially in the Caribbean during hurricane season, we immediately come here and prepare for what we have to do. Now, the airplane is kept ready to go at any time, and pilots are ready to go at a moment's notice.
There may be catastrophic injuries from a disaster or big storms that have rolled through, and you've got people without shelter, without clean water, without hygiene, and in dire needs of medical aid. So every minute counts.
Our work here is not just about airplanes, it's not just about cargo, and it's not even just about relief supplies and helping people in their immediate need. It's about sharing the love of Christ with people, and that's what motivates us.
Galatians 6:9 says to not grow weary in doing good.
Thousands of people jammed roads for miles in Atlanta to get boxes of food and gift cards donated by entertainer Tyler Perry. His studio prepared 5,000 boxes of canned vegetables and $25 gift cards for families to pick up ahead of Thanksgiving. Recapping one of our top news stories. This morning, the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen served up more than just a meal. Snow Ridge Stables came by with special visitors for guests to mingle with while they enjoyed a stack of pancakes delivered by our local IHOP restaurant. And a look at weekend weather. A bit of a chilly start to the week. Some clouds overnight with a low of -2. And for Monday, skies clearing in the afternoon and a high of +2. After the break, catch BCN's interview with Dr. Gregory Jantz, author of 7 Answers for Anxiety. Dr. Jantz shares with us how to respond when anxiety strikes our lives.
Worrying about the smallest details and attempting to control situations can sometimes overwhelm us, causing serious anxiety issues. Dr. Gregory Jans is the founder of the Center of Place of Hope, which is one of the top facilities for treatment of depression and anxiety in the United States. He's the author of the book, 7 Answers for Anxiety. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Dr. Jans.
Good to be with you, and boy, what a time for anxiety.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, with COVID-19 going on right now, you say that anxiety is defined as a painful or apprehensive uneasiness. Where do you think that really originates from, and why is it so much worse for some people?
Because we've had trauma in our life, and this period we're in, and you said COVID-19, this is a period of chronic anxiety. It's kind of like a pandemic purgatory. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we're kind of miserable where we are. We don't want to go back to March, and we look ahead to the future, and we're really wondering, wow, how's it going to be? And that's anxiety. Anxiety means how it has hit us physically. It's affecting our sleep. We feel anxiety or we feel fear kind of throughout our whole body.
So, Dr. Jans, how have anxiety and depression cases increased since the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, one of the things we know is the World Health Organization tells us right now, anxiety is the #1 worldwide, it's called a disorder. So it's above heart disease, it's above cancer, it's above depression. Anxiety, so we think about, we have a pandemic, but we have an epidemic in the pandemic, and that's anxiety.
So what's the big difference then, in your opinion, between anxiety and a phobia?
Well, a phobia could be a specific fear. Sometimes we hear the term agoraphobia, which technically means the fear of open places. But here's what we know. Agoraphobia, the fear of going out, has increased. As we've quarantined, as we've confined, as we've isolated, we've also created a fear of going out. I mean, think about the social anxiety right now. People don't know, do I look at you? When do I wear my mask? And everything is socially awkward. I was just with a gentleman today, and he reached over and gave me a big hug. By the way, it was fine with me, but it's like he goes, "Oh no, I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry." People don't know what to do, what's okay. That's social anxiety.
How about some of the anxiety and depression our seniors are feeling right now, being isolated from a lot of their family members?
Yes, there's the isolation, and virtual relationships can only go so far. And I'm glad we have those. I'm glad I can see you today and share. But we also know that we need real relationship and actual real life relationships as well. And we know that when that's cut off and cut off abruptly, we find ways to replace that. Unfortunately, among all ages, addictions are up, whether it's a digital addiction, cyber addiction, could be alcohol, and depending on where you live, alcohol sales have really skyrocketed, rotted too, but it's like 500 to 600% more alcohol sales right now.
Why do people with deep anxiety try to control their surroundings?
Any way that I can have control, it makes me feel like, some relief. You see, anxiety is all about gaining some sense of control. This is why when we first had the beginning stages of this pandemic, there was a toilet paper craze. Everybody went out and they bought in herds, bought toilet paper. You don't hear any of that now, but really that was driven because of fear. And fear, we do drastic things and we tend to run in groups. If one person's doing it, go, I have to do something because it gives me that sense of control.
Dr. Jans, what are some of the hidden assumptions people with anxiety actually believe?
Well, they do believe, and by the way, anxiety or fear always distorts reality. It makes us hypersensitive. At times, it causes us to see things that are not there. It can cause us to be critical. We can be very judgmental because of that anxiety and fear. So one of the things you need to know is anxiety distorts reality.
So what's the big difference then between a person's objective or subjective reality in terms of managing that anxiety?
Well, it doesn't matter if it's all our perception. So anxiety is going to be anxiety, whether it's a real concern or not. And by the way, we're not to be faulted for that. That's just how it works. And you can train your body to constantly feel anxious. We're in a hyper vigilant state right now. Chronic stress, chronic anxiety, and it's like the state of anxiety we're in has put us in a perpetual state of uncertainty, and we need to understand that's going to have a physical effect. We also know that if we isolate in our relationships with others too much, anxiety will go up. We also know that it can put us in the middle of a real spiritual desert. We can disconnect spiritually.
You know, we talked about, like you said before, using video conferencing, Skype or Zoom to be able to reach out to loved ones, but nothing will really replace giving somebody a hug, a loving embrace, and that one-on-one human interaction and connection. Do you think because we're lacking a lot of that, that's also heightening a lot of the anxiety levels?
Absolutely. You see, comfort comes in touch. Two ways we receive comfort: good, positive words that are comforting, and we also receive it through touch. Boy, there's a power in a hug. We know that touch alters body chemistry. That's right. It releases even endorphins, and chemistry in our body changes when we are hugged, when we're touched. And so we've got to have, humans, by the way, really do need touch. So some of that's been lacking.
Now, you said in the past that fear of the past drains the promise of the future. Can you explain that in more detail?
Sure, we may be traumatized by not only what's going on, but it could be a trigger from the past. Maybe you've struggled with some depression and anxiety. Maybe there's been some real trauma in the past. So now we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's a re-trigger. And so that past kind of gets moved forward. And that moving forward of the past amplifies our present anxiety.
Now, your book seems to suggest that we try to rewire the way we view life by eliminating negative messages. How can we really do this?
Yes, we've got to keep plugging the truth in. And by the way, it's baby steps every day. I do something the old-fashioned way. I pull, 3x5 card. Do you remember those? I have one right here. 3x5 card. I'm going to write a verse. I'm going to write some truth. I'm going to carry this in my pocket, and I'm going to recite that verse or that positive affirmation or truth. My brain needs a way to renew. Otherwise, we keep recycling the negative. I call it ants, automatic negative thoughts.
So how do anxieties maybe create a little bit of a life on overload?
Yeah, it keeps us in overload. So remember, anxiousness, and by the way, it's okay. We're human beings. We may have some worry. We may have some anxiety. It's just how long do we dwell in that? Because it will have implications in our relationships, in our physical well-being. A habitual state of anxiety that's chronic over time lowers our immunity. We are going to see people because of anxiety that will have physical concerns. This will happen.
So, Dr. Jans, do perfectionists tend to be more prone to anxiety? And if so, why?
Yes, perfectionist. Well, we all know one. And a perfectionist may be a person, it's all got to be just right, just right, just right. And it's never just right. Okay? That's a perfectionist. We like to do an excellent job, but that's different than perfectionism. So perfectionism can step over and be more obsessive compulsive. Obsessive compulsive means I am consumed by my thoughts and my behaviors. And this is a time right now, if you've struggled with, germs and things being clean, right now could be a real struggle. That obsessive thought, we can never get things clean enough. I'm never safe enough. And that's that obsessive compulsiveness that can come out of perfectionism.
Now, there are times in life when anxiety is a normal, healthy response to various circumstances. How can we really tell if we're overreacting?
If you stay in it over time, an initial anxiety when we receive maybe unfavorable or unpleasant news, and we're in a state of kind of a shock. We're shocked by it. And we have a period of recovery after that, of just kind of bringing back our senses and resetting. But if you don't ever reset emotionally, you will find yourself really in a unhealthy state of anxiety. Now, what do humans try to do? We try to self-medicate. I can't handle this anxiety anymore. That's where they drink. That's where they overeat. That's where we do diversion behaviors that at times are self-destructive.
The Bible tells us not to be anxious about anything. Now, that's pretty difficult at the best of times. Is anxiety a sin?
I don't put anxiety as a sin, but I think what we can do with anxiety could end up being sinful. If I end up being engaged in self-destructive behaviors and develop secret addictions, and I start lying and living a double life, I'm really setting myself up for some problems. And so I think it can lead us down the wrong path. But you know what? We're human beings, and we're going to have these experiences. But how long? I mean, right now, pandemic, this is a chance to reset or regret. You'll regret by doing certain things or not doing certain things.
So where does one's personal life fit into the discussion of anxiety?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for us to go, you know, where's my fears in my life? Maybe take 15 minutes, take a notepad, write down what's my top 10 fears. What are the top 10 things that just keep recycling in my mind that I'm dwelling upon? Some of those fears are things that may be totally out of our control, and I'm learning a new way of walking in faith. And maybe I need to match up God's word or a verse to each of those fears and begin to renew my mind because we've got to reset the truth.
Now, you include a very important chapter about the importance of making healthy choices. What does that really look like in practical terms, outside of maybe a few less donuts?
Yeah, well, I think a practical choice goes, how well am I caring for myself? Self-care. That may include things as sleep. If you're anxious, sleep could be disruptive. But here's the other thing. I just talked to somebody the other day, and I think he said he was up to about 12 cups of coffee a day.
Wow.
Well, 12 cups of coffee. He goes, I'm drinking it to soothe me. No, it's not soothing you. It's creating more anxiety. Replace that. Here we go. Have some water. Okay? Drink your water. Those are simple things. But when we're anxious, we tend not to do the simple things.
How about focusing in on God's word and meditating on his love and spending more time in his presence? That'll also calm the nerves a little bit and maybe some of the anxiety issues as well.
Absolutely. And that's why we need, maybe it's that 3x5 card again, and you're writing down a verse, and you're going to go out for that 20-minute walk and say that verse out loud and watch what happens. There's a way that God uses scriptures that come alive to us. There is a renewal that can happen. Keep practicing it.
So, Dr. Jans, any final advice for those people who are feeling overwhelmed by anxiety?
Try not to do it alone. By the way, we tend to isolate under anxiety. It may be a time to have 2, maybe 3 individuals that you can really tell the truth, where you're praying together. If you've reached a point where it's so significant you feel some despair, that's really the time, though, to ask for help. That's the time to go, okay, I can't stay here. It's not a good place to be. My thoughts are getting more irrational. So there is a season, there is a time where I need to ask for help.
You know, there's one good thing about not a lot of sports taking place right now, actually being there to watch your team. You're a little less anxious, especially when they lose, right? So maybe that's one good thing about COVID. I don't know. Dr. Gregory Jans, author of the book, 7 Answers for Anxiety. Thanks for joining me today from Washington State.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Many today seem to be embracing what's called the woke movement with its race and gender theories and its focus on victims, and it's playing a major role in the upcoming U.S. election. Social justice is a big focus as well, but how well does the woke movement line up with biblical principles? Today's guest is Dr. Kel Beisner, the national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance and author of the booklet entitled Social Justice versus Biblical Justice, How Good Intentions Undermine Justice and Gospel. All right, so he joins me now via Skype from Memphis, Tennessee. Kel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. It's great to be back with you on the show.
So, Kel, let's start with this. I'm sure some people have heard of the woke movement, but possibly many have not. What exactly is the woke movement? What does that mean?
That's that's a really great question because I think the woke movement is extremely broad and it's not really precisely defined. What we might say is that it's sort of the younger generation's continuation of the progressive movement, which has roots clear back into the late 19th century. And what I see in the woke movement is, first of all, a wonderful compassion, a real desire to look at people who are suffering in various different ways, whether it's poverty or disease or prejudice or anything else. And so many young people in the woke movement look at these suffering people and they just respond immediately with a heartfelt desire to be able to help these people. And man, if that's the root of it, you know, it's something to applaud. And so that's. I don't just start off with a knee-jerk reaction to it. I very much appreciate that. At the same time, one of my favorite economists, a man named Walter Williams, wrote in his book, The State Against Blacks, in which he examined the actual consequences, not just the intentions, but the actual consequences of lots of American federal government policy intended to help African Americans through the 1960s, 70s, into the 1980s. He wrote the book in the early 80s. What he found was that without exception, every one of those policies, regardless of the good intents, actually harmed African Americans more than it helped them. And so at one point in the book, he said, truly compassionate policy requires dispassionate analysis. I think that's brilliant. And it's what I would love to see grow more and more in the woke movement, a wedding together of compassionate motivation with dispassionate analysis of actual consequences of policy. One of the things that I'm concerned about in the woke movement is that many times folks will think, well, these people are suffering, and I want to see that suffering relieved, and doing that is a matter of justice. Well, you know, sometimes it is a matter of justice, but sometimes instead it's a matter of something quite different. It's a matter of something that we call charity or grace. Our very word charity comes from the Greek word charis, the word for grace in the New Testament. And if we confuse justice and grace, we can wind up with policies that actually harm where we mean to do well. And we can also then really confuse the Christian faith, and what is central to it is the good news of our being saved by grace, not by our own merit through our good works.
Mm-hmm. So how could it harm them if they're trying to do good for them?
Well, let's take a concrete example out of fairly typical policy. Some folks will look at low wages that very young, early stage workers receive, perhaps in fast food restaurants and things like that, and they'll say, "Look, you know, this is a very low wage. How can this person thrive on that kind of a wage? This ought to be raised. And so now there are different ways that we could go about raising that wage. One way would be to provide more training for that person so that she's able to earn more. She's able to produce more, and therefore an employer can afford to pay her more and still keep the business running, right? Another way to do that is simply for the employee himself to just simply, go to school, learn more skills, spend more time around the job, learning from people who've been there for a long time. Another way to do that is to ask the government to determine a minimum amount that people in this sort of job must be paid per hour, and we'll call that a minimum wage. And when we go to that, the government doing it, one of the things that we have to remember is that government is, by definition, an entity of force. Every policy that government sets forth, it is prepared to enforce by the threat of fine, the threat of imprisonment, and if you resist that, even the threat of death ultimately. And so we really should be very, very sure that this is something we think is essential to real justice if we want the government to do this.
Okay. Now, I think a big aspect of the woke movement is social justice, right? So what role does social justice play in the woke movement exactly?
Yeah. Well, it helps to try to get a good handle on just what is meant by social justice. And even that, unfortunately, is kind of difficult. One doesn't find a lot of precise definitions of it. One of the definitions I saw at actually at a Canadian government website a number of years ago, and I'm trying to pull this from memory. I actually do quote it in the booklet on social justice versus biblical justice, was basically that social justice seeks to ensure some degree of equality of economic condition, of housing, of healthcare, of education, and so on, among all the people in a society.
Right.
So equality of outcome maybe is what we could term that. Another, some people will respond to that. Well, but since people have different likes and dislikes, they have different skills, they have different aptitudes, they have different backgrounds. A child who grows up in a home with parents who couldn't care less about reading and education just simply is very unlikely to have the same outcome as a child who grows up in a home with parents who really highly value education and reading.
Mm-hmm.
So equal outcomes really can't be achieved very well, but what we can do is go for equal opportunities. But even there, I just now illustrated how opportunities can be very unequal.
Right.
If you were born in the last couple of decades, you have all kinds of opportunities for high-tech healthcare that I didn't have, having been born 65 years ago, and so equality even of opportunity is something that we cannot necessarily achieve. And the attempt to achieve these equalities requires force. And it typically requires forcing some people to forgo or to forfeit what they could otherwise enjoy through their own efforts in order to provide something to other people who have not made those same efforts. So what we need to do is to come up with a solidly consistent definition of justice. And as a Christian theologian, I look to the Bible for my standard of what I would do with that. And my studies there, looking at all the uses of the different Hebrew and Greek terms that are translated just, justice, right, righteous, and so on, what I found in looking at how they're actually used in the Bible, I summarized the definition of justice this way. Justice means rendering impartially and proportionally to everyone his due in conformity with the righteous standard that is God's moral law. So the criteria there are four. Impartiality. We don't play favorites. There aren't some people to whom the laws don't apply, but they apply to the rest of us. And proportionality. You don't use the same reward for tremendously fine performance, producing an extremely valuable good, that you do for sloppy, lazy performance, producing a good that hardly anybody wants. Also, you don't punish, say, shoplifting the same way you punish murder, right? So there's proportionality of what is due to what people actually perform, what their conduct is. So we look at merit. We look at what someone has earned, either positively or negatively. And the criteria for that we find in the moral law of God as summarized, for example, in the Ten Commandments. So if we understand justice that way, then we realize that since people do differ and differ gloriously, God help us if we didn't, but because people differ and differ gloriously in what we enjoy, what we're skilled at, what we're gifted at, and so on, the attempt to equalize everyone, or even to make them more equal than they otherwise would naturally be, is actually the opposite of justice, because it requires partiality, requires playing favorites, promoting some people, some groups over other groups, and it ignores proportionality, and it ignores what is due, what is actually deserved.
Okay, so you're kind of explaining how social justice compares with biblical justice as you understand it, right? Okay, now in your writings, you have also distinguished between positive rights, which you associate with social justice, right? And the negative rights, which you say are more consistent with biblical justice. So what's the difference between those?
Yeah, it's a very important difference, and unfortunately, of course, the term negative has a negative, a nasty connotation, right?
Of course, yeah.
And so that's kind of sad, but I distinguish the two this way, and this is a fairly conventional distinction among philosophers of ethics. Negative rights are rights against harm, so that my negative right to be alive, right, is not a right to have everybody else provide for me the air and the water and the food and the clothing and the shelter that I need, right? It is a right against having other people take my life away from me unjustly. And I can actually forfeit that right. If I'm in the midst of attacking somebody else, threatening to kill him, he has a right to use necessary force to prevent that, even to the point of killing me. So I've forfeited that negative right. But fundamentally, a negative right is a right against harm. My right to property is not a right for somebody to provide for me all the books that you see in my background. It is a right for me to expect that nobody who comes into my home is going to just grab some of those books and walk off and steal them. My right to health is not a right for other people to ensure that I get adequate nutrition and proper exercise and so on. It's a right not to have other people assault and batter me, poison me, and so on. So negative rights are rights against harm. Positive rights, supposedly, are rights to particular benefits. And the problem with positive rights is twofold. The first one is, if it's a right to something that other people are supposed to provide, how do we identify which other people? Can we say, that James down the street owes me a wardrobe? No, we really can't do that. And so the notion of who owes is unanswered in positive rights. But the other problem with positive rights is that in order to enforce them, we're going to wind up contradicting negative rights, violating negative rights. If I have a right to property, and if God has ordained the state, the civil government, to enforce justice, then if the state's going to provide property for me, well, it could provide it from my own earnings, in which case it's not made any difference, right? Or it can provide it from the earnings of others. But if it provides it from the earnings of others, then it is violating their negative right against harm, the taking of their property unjustly. Nothing gives me a right to somebody else's property.
Right.
And so positive rights are inherently self-contradictory, and for that matter, also would change drastically over time. For 10,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 200 years ago, I had a right not to have somebody punch me in the nose. You had a right, Jeanette, for nobody to steal your property, right? But 1,000 years ago, 150 years ago, who had a right to antibiotics? Nobody. We didn't have antibiotics. So do rights change over time? Is justice a malleable thing that changes over time? I don't think so. It's supposed to be a transcendent principle applicable to all people in all circumstances.
Such a huge, huge topic. Speaking of positive rights versus negative rights. But Dr. Cal Beisner, it looks like we're out of time, unfortunately. I know there's a lot to say, but we'll have to have you back on again. Dr. Cal
Thanks very
Beisner,
much.
yes, national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance and author of Social Justice versus Biblical Justice. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jeanette. God bless.
The storms of life can at times take a real toll on our mental and emotional health. Today we're chatting with a woman who has an amazing story of healing and how God helped her after she was viciously gang raped about 10 years ago. Her name is Colette Aikema, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, an organization whose mission it is to help Christians become effective in sharing Christ in everyday conversations. Colette, welcome to BCN.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just honored to be here, so thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure having you on board. Colette, describe first of all for our viewers who you were before you were being raped.
I was just a regular, well, maybe, I think we have to go really far back. I think that the issue of sexuality was put on my heart when I was younger. I was abused when I was a child. And I also think so as much as that was also for evil, I also think that just ignited in me a awareness of sexuality and the fact that there's this there's something that we as Christians often don't talk about. And I grew up in a believing family, an amazing, loving home. I was raised Christian, and I know what I believe, and I know the God who loves me. And that was, but it was always kind of a bit of there was an undercurrent of this in my life. I was dealing with compulsive masturbation, and then of course I was raped when I was in high school, in junior high. So it was really, it changed everything. And yet at the same time, this was something that was already, there was something there. There was a part of me that wanted to have this conversation. There was a part of me that had been ignited in this. And, all of, just like everything, I only learned from all these things. And now I'm able to just talk about what happened and realize that, God's grace is more.
Let's describe what actually led to that fateful day when you were raped.
It was just a regular day. I was just a young girl. And it's hard to talk about the specifics of that day, Hal. But it was a place where I should have been safe, and I was with people where I should have been safe. And I was not being kept safe that day. And it was just terrible realizing that I could be in a safe community and be, I think I grew up knowing that, knowing the scriptures, knowing that we all have gone astray. We all like sheep have gone astray, and there's no one who does good, not even one. And yet you believe that people just won't do certain things, right? And then I had to learn that even Christians themselves will do depraved things. And that was very, very difficult because it completely shattered my shattered my spirituality and my faith in my community. And yet, God was able to keep me safe at that time afterward. So.
Those people who attacked you, were they ever captured and charged?
No, they were not.
Wow. Is it still an open investigation, or is it a cold case with the police?
It's a cold case with the police because it ended up being a historic investigation because I was unable to come forward with my testimony and with my experience until just a few years ago, and by then too much time had already passed. And when the perpetrators were, in being investigated, they denied, they refused to have lie detector tests, and then refused basically all communication, and then the investigation went dead from there.
Let me ask you something, Colette. It's been about 10 years now. Have you been able to forgive those who did this horrifying thing to you?
Yes, I have. I have been able to forgive them. And my body and my mind do not forget. And even my heart does not forget. But my life is full of brokenness as well. And like I said, we are all equal under God. We've all sinned equally. And so, yes, I have forgiven them.
Colette, how did this really affect your relationships with men and women?
I think it just kind of blew up what was already an issue for me. So I was already, just like any regular girl, I was going through the end of puberty, and so just like any other any other girl, I was jittery around boys. I became aroused at awkward times. I wondered if I was gay because there were girls that I really loved. I wondered if I was bi. I wondered if maybe I was actually a boy. And so all these things were on my mind. But the rape, and then especially what's really important for people to understand is that because of what happened, the trauma, I also became addicted to pornography. And it wasn't just, people tend to say, well, girls, it's different for girls. Girls are not addicted to hardcore pornography. Well, yeah, they are. When we Google something, we find the exact same thing as men. We find the exact same thing as children and as seniors, right? So we need to realize that the internet's not discretionary that way. And as much as people say that women are not visually wired, we also are visually stimulated, some women more than others, and we're not all the same. And so for me, pornography became a real problem. I really struggled with pornography addiction and sexual addiction because of what happened, which led to all kinds of problems, right? I mean, because of the porn addiction, what happened was it's something we call a hyper-sexualized outlook on life. So what that means is that I just saw sexuality everywhere. I would just be walking down the road and I would see people crossing the street toward me, and immediately when my mind would go, I bet they're going to go have sex. Completely out of context. And I wasn't raised that way. It's important to understand that that's not how I was. I didn't think anybody else experienced life that way. So I felt very, very outside. I felt very alone.
So let's talk about how God really helped, first of all, with your healing after being attacked and raped, and secondly, through this porn addiction.
Right. Well, what's really amazing is that I think the one thing that we have to remember is that human sexuality is inconsistent. And human sexuality is subject to change and subject to trauma and subject to brain chemistry and genetics and all these things. But Christian sexuality and moral sexuality is not dependent on those things. And so for me, what became huge was realizing that I was able to see the trauma, I was able to see my addiction, I was able to see the fallout, all the consequences. I was able to see that through the lens of a Christian worldview. And because of that, God reminded me that there are constants, that there are realities, that no matter what happens to my body, no matter what happens in my life, no matter what emotions I have or thoughts I have, these are things that do not change. Objective truths about me, about other people, about the life that God has given me, those are things that do not change. And that completely changed everything, because then it was no longer dependent on how I felt and on how I perceived things to be. I could read the scriptures and trust that reality is what it is, regardless of how I feel.
Now, you spoke earlier about maybe some sexual confusion. You thought maybe you were bi at one point in time. Did you receive counseling to help you seek out your true identity when it comes to your sexuality?
Yes, I did. So after my husband and I got married, we actually, of course, which is really inevitable when there's sexual trauma and sexual addiction. We started having some problems, and so I went to counseling, and he went to counseling, and it was really what was also amazing was that I was at the university at the time. I was taking a university course on sex addiction. And as I was taking this course, I went into it just thinking, wow, this is fascinating. This is really cool. And then because I enjoyed that, I thought it was interesting to talk about what makes sex addiction and what makes other sexuality normal or healthy, right? So we talked about that and we had those discussions. And then as time went on and as I was going through counseling, I realized, wait a minute, it makes sense that I am understanding this language because this is a problem that I have. And I didn't even realize it until then. And so there was a real moment for me, if you don't mind my sharing. I share it not to be graphic, but I share it because I want people to understand how horrible this moment can be. But I know many people who have come to this moment, and that there's hope for you. There's healing. There can be that turnaround because there's a beautiful plan of sexuality that we can follow. And so what happened for me was that I was just using pornography like any other day, and what I was watching turned out to be one girl with several men. And as I was watching, I could see that she was trying to push one of them away and starting to say no. And as I was watching, I realized there is something wrong with me. There is something wrong. I need help. And that was really the moment that God just changed everything. I picked up the phone, I called a trusted friend, and I said, I need to tell you something. And that's what changed everything.
You know, Colette, you really hit the nail on the head there. I've spoken to other people who are addicted to drugs, alcohol, sex, and they say, you have to hit your rock bottom and realize that you need help. You can't have other people say to you, you have a problem, pointing fingers at you. The walls go up, right? People become defensive, say, I don't have a problem, I'm fine, So you have to reach that rock bottom before you finally realize that, yes, I finally need help. And it's amazing that you did that. Outside of the counseling, and you reached out to your friend, and of course you're praying to our Heavenly Father, what else really helped you overcome the addiction?
What really helped me overcome the addiction was the support group that I was able to start. So there was a contact that I had in Lethbridge, a man who had already set up a Christian support group for men who were dealing with sex addiction and porn addiction. And so when I got into contact with him, I asked him, is there one for women? And he said, well, no, but you should start one. So I started one, and I sat alone in a room waiting for people to join me for a year. It didn't really take off. And then suddenly somebody contacted me and said, you need to come and speak to this group of young women. And when we started talking, we were all like, oh, me too, me too. I can't believe you're saying the words that I have always felt. We were sharing stories where we were just speaking each other's language, and it was just unreal. And so we started a support group where we were just praying for each other and helping each other to live out our sexuality the way that we believe we should, based on our worldview. And so that's what was really, what I think has been so hard for me in being in Lethbridge in the last few months, is knowing that our city, along with so many other cities, have banned the kind of counseling that I went through. And because it was, unfortunately, we think that the type of counseling that comes to, where we talk about sexuality and issues of gender, we think that we have to make sure that we protect LGBTQ people, and we should. And that's why we need to be really careful that we define things, because I've had the therapy that has now been banned, but I have specifically asked for it because it helped me reduce my unwanted sexual attractions and unwanted sexual behavior. And because of that, it is now defined as being illegal. And that's something we need to speak up more. Women like me, people like me, we need to speak up and say, this is counseling that I went to. It was not torture. It was a good thing. And I need to be free to choose the counseling that I went to, because just because something illegal is done to me, does that mean that it should be illegal for me to seek help?
Colette, what advice do you have for those who may be going through confusing times like you experienced, especially when it comes to sex and gender?
I think what's really important for us to understand is that we've been getting one dimension of an idea about sexuality. And so I've been doing some research into some of the sex education that we get in our community of Lethbridge when it comes to these topics, some of the organizations that provide sex education. And this is where we learn about sexuality. Unfortunately, the sex education that we receive and that youth receive is unfortunately it's not holistic in the fact that it doesn't include spiritual aspects. And so what happens is that people like myself, our sexuality gets conflicted with other things and we don't know where to go. And we need to know that there are other options. And so it's really important, especially that the Christian community, that the church community step up and say, there's a Christian worldview, Christian view of sexuality that offers you hope and healing. And it goes far beyond any kind of fleeting sexual identity.
You talked about some of the therapy that's available now for women. You know, it's been around for men for a very long time, especially the programs. How about today? Are there still great support programs for women today addicted to porn?
I would say I think if a woman reached out to me now compared to 5 years ago, I think it's possible that there might be a few more resources, a few more books. But to be honest, Hal, it has not taken off as it should. You know, men are getting the help that they need, but there's no the support group for women in Lethbridge is no longer running because there was nobody else who was able to step up and take over. There's not many groups of them. Even across Canada, even in the United States, they're there, but you really have to look for them. And in our community, especially in our small community, people feel like there's no help. And that's why I'm so eager to tell people that there is help. And organizations like Faith Beyond Belief really can show you that there's more. There really is hope.
I was thinking maybe, you should take the lead and take the charge, and you're doing that already with Faith Beyond Belief. Colette Ikema, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, thanks so much for your powerful story today and for joining me.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.